For more on this conversation, we are now joined by international relations analyst Nelson Gashagaza, and he joins us now via our video link. Nelson, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. First, let's touch on here some of the breaking news coming in today, the withdrawal of the SANDF as well as those in the SADC mission. What are your thoughts when it comes to this move?
I think by now, where the SADC forces were not doing anything in current context in Goma, because they are barricaded by M23, so they cannot fight, they cannot move, they cannot do much. So the only alternative was to go home. Now the question, that was always the question, really. It wasn't like there was another alternative of staying there, because M23 it does not want them there. And then Rwanda itself has said that SADC forces are belligerent, which came to actually support a government that works with the genocidal force, FDLR, with purpose of removing the leadership in Kigali. So the presence of the force itself was creating issues between Rwanda, South Africa, and SADC region in all.
Yeah, and when it comes to this meeting now, Nelson, that will be taking place on Monday, that being of SADC as well as the East African community, what are the possibilities surrounding a conflict resolution, particularly now the stance which has been taken by SADC?
So I think we really need to look into these things with so much context and then understanding. One, when SADC came into DRC, there was already a peacekeeping mission of the East Africa community that was there. So they came to replace it because President Tshisekedi had accused the East African forces of not being offensive. So SADC forces came in to be an offensive force. But at that time, the East African community had managed to get a ceasefire for almost 6 months, and then M23 had already withdrawn almost 80% of the territory it had. With SADC in, M23 has tripled its size of territory it controls. It is controlling almost all the major cities in the North Kivu and South Kivu. So therefore, it's practically impossible right now to think that what was at the table 2 years ago can be the same as today. So M23 today has more power of beginning, and then DRC government seem to not want to recognize that particular effect. But so until DRC government understands that the only option is right now, as the situation is negotiating, then there's nothing really that a ministerial meeting can do as much. So right now the ball is with the government of DRC that has all continued to say that it will not negotiate with M23.
Yeah, and looking at the deployment of the SADC troops, also including some of the soldiers from South Africa, would you say that the deployment of the SADC troops has been effective? Because you are essentially also saying a bit earlier on that they can't move and not much can be done.
No, at the end of the day, they did not do much because they were an offensive force. They were not peacekeeping forces. So therefore, M23 looked at them as any other enemy to fight. So they tried to support the government of DRC in protecting Goma. But at the end of the day, they failed. So right now, Goma is in the hands of M23, and then South African troops and then other SADC troops under protection of M23 right now. So they cannot do much.
And what do you make of some of the criticisms focusing on South Africa and the deployment of some of the SANDF soldiers to the DRC? What do you make of the criticisms in which we saw from South Africa, particularly when we saw the deaths of those 14 soldiers?
I think the criticism were in some ways founded and in other ways not founded. One, you have to understand that when you are not a peacekeeping mission, then you are involved in direct combat. So people have to die. There's no army that fights without expecting losses. I think that's unimaginable. But the criticism really should have focused on why the force was deployed there in first place, because that's where actually the issue lies. Because before SADC comes in, we had another force that had already managed to have a ceasefire for 6 months. So when SADC came in, what did they come to do? That's the question people should have asked in first place. Because the force that was there was not failing. It was actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And now that we find ourselves here with the withdrawal of the SADC troops, where does this place diplomatic relations between the DRC, between Rwanda, as well as SADC?
So I think there's two things that might happen if, let's say, the proposal that came from Rwanda happens. That means if DRC decides to have a direct conversation with M23, that will kind of change the narrative where the DRC government have always insisted that M23 is a puppet. Therefore, they would rather want to negotiate with Rwanda and not M23, which Rwanda has already insisted that it cannot have any peace agreement or de-escalation with DRC as long as M23 is not on the table, because from Rwanda perspective, it's looking at it as the presence of M23 and the fight that is happening on the border with Rwanda is an existential problem, a security one. So therefore, if DRC does not have a conversation with M23 to end the conflict, Rwanda security remains at risk. So now that SADC forces are going to go out, it opens a new avenue where the two regional bloc actually works from a perspective of finding a common ground to the conflict in DRC. Because right now what was happening is the East African community was on its own side, looking at SADC as a force that came in as a belligerent. Meanwhile, SADC was there thinking that it was there to protect another member country. But what we saw is that the deployment of SADC forces have created more issues than fixing issues. So the removal of the force is a good sign that the two regions are actually starting to understand the issue in a common way.
All right, Nelson, thank you so much for that insight. That is Nelson Gashagaza. He is an international relations expert there, talking to us about the developments coming out from the DRC, particularly with the decision there from SADC withdrawing some of its troops. Of course, this will certainly be done in phases. Also, they're welcoming that approach, Nelson, and saying that, well, the deployment of SADC troops made, well, according to Nelson, created more issues for the region.